Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mechanical Muse Live, the show where we talk about games, comics, science fiction, fantasy, books, everything else that folks like us are into, toys, and all the rest. Tonight, we have a very cool show because I'm going to be previewing Cool Name RPG's next playtest version, which I'm very excited about. I'm also going to be giving you some important dates to go along with that, and we'll have a lot of very cool stuff to go over. So before we get into too much of that, I'm going to start out with our usual stuff. First off is the mail call, which sadly, there is no mail call today. No, I didn't get anything good in the mail, which, makes my wife happy because it means I haven't ordered anything new. But in the meantime, I don't have anything cool new to show you this week. Now, game night report. That I can tell you a little bit about. We have actually, over the last couple of weeks, we have started our Cool Name RPG campaign. And when I say campaign, what's different about what we're doing now is that we're actually, we're not just trying to play out different scenes. We're not doing short adventures. We're not just doing quick encounters. We're playing a full-blown Cool Name RPG campaign. Now, I'll be telling you guys a lot more about this as we go along. But so far, I have to say that, this is a nerve-wracking process making this game, right? You're worried, am I doing it right? Am I pulling in the right information? Am I listening to everyone enough? Am I listening to everyone too much? You really struggle with all these things. But man, when we saw it hit the table in like true, honest to God game night format, it worked really well. Now, I know it's not going to be right for everyone, but I'll tell you what, for folks who like this sort of game, I think it's going to be pretty great. So looking forward to talking to all of you about that. Let me also make sure that I got my chat up because the chat window's here. So if you have any questions or comments or anything, feel free to jump in and ask. Next up, what else do I have to talk about tonight? Got to talk a little bit about Gen Con. I just want to remind folks that Gen Con badge registration is coming up February 11th. I'm going to be there. We're going to have events. What I'm trying to figure out right now is how I'm going to run the events. Now, if I put them into the Gen Con system, they could get filled up with folks who aren't you guys, right? Who are the folks that really want to come and play and who backed it. If I try to set up independent games, it's a little tricky because then I don't have a table reserved. And so I'm trying to wedge myself in someplace. So if you have any ideas or experience with this sort of thing, I've done a lot of Gen Con programming in the past, but nothing quite like this. And so, one idea I had was I could schedule it for 4 seats, but always leave 2 seats open for backers. One idea that I had for all of the games. So anyway, give it some thought. Hop on Discord or Facebook. Let us know what you think, or just jump in the chat here tonight. Also, Gen Con event registration is May 19th, 2024. That's really important because that's when you'll actually be able to go in and sign up for events. So mark your calendars. Now, I have some even cooler dates. The first date, Tuesday, February 6th, coming up this Tuesday, Playtest version 0.1 is going out to the backers. Now, as you're going to see, there's a lot more in this book than there was the last time you saw it. We're talking over 50 pages of content right now. It's huge. All right. In a good way. It's huge in a good way. It's not just filled with rules piled on top of rules or anything like that. But there's a lot of content and enough that you can really get playing with it. So I'm excited to see how it goes for folks. Then on February 13th, we're going to release it to the Discord groups. So we'll have it on all the Discord groups at that point. Now, again, if you're a backer, you'll already been able to get the download. But if you are not, first, you should try to back it. It's kind of awesome. But alternatively, you can wait until that Tuesday. Now, shortly after this, we're going to be asking for some really early feedback from folks. There's going to be a survey. There's going to be a conversation about it because we want to get this out to a larger audience. We want to get some folks maybe post on EN World and get some folks to take a look at it there. We want to get more feedback on it. We're also going to be starting to use our consulting designers in a more focused way. Now, up till now, it's often been things like, look at this whole document and tell us what you think. Look at this whole document and give us your ideas. Been great. We've gotten amazing feedback. But what I want to do next is start to look at their areas of expertise because they filled out a survey too. Everyone's filling out surveys. They filled out a survey too, where they listed what things they were the most interested in and felt the most comfortable reviewing. And so in some of those ways now, I'm going to be able to reach out to these folks and really get them to focus in on some of their areas of expertise and really give us some cool feedback. So I'm really, really excited about that. That's going to be coming up as well. Also, just to update you, we're still looking at the Creative Commons 0 license as the most likely license that we'll use. So again, nothing has pushed us in a way opposite of that. We still have another lawyer's call that we need to do, but it's looking a lot like that, because what that does is it lets everyone use the core content, but it lets you create your own content and still protects that as yours. Because look, realistically, if you put a ton of time and money and effort into a project, you're hoping to pay the people involved, right? And you can't do that if everything you make is free, because what you started with was free. We want to make it so that you can put out your own thing. So that's going to be coming along as well. So yeah, needless to say, we have a lot going on. And so this week I'm going to be walking you through the latest version of Cool Name RPG. Now, keep in mind, I haven't pulled everything into this. What I did is I only pulled in the stuff that I was ready to talk to you about. And honestly, we may not get to it all anyway, but I'm going to walk you through it. I'm going to talk about what we did and why we did it. And I think this is going to be really interesting to those of you who have been watching and waiting to see what comes out of all of this. So without further, I knew I forgot something. I promised I would talk about this. I know everyone's waiting to hear about Cool Name, but I just have to say really quick, have you watched The Last of Us? Because I never played the game, and people kept going, oh, you got to watch it. It's great. And I'm like, I don't like zombie shows. This show is some of the best writing of any zombie show, or even really most drama shows that I've ever seen. It's a beautiful show. It's an amazing show. The action is amazing as well, but the stories, the people involved is just like, man, it hits me in the feels every time I watch it. This show is unexpectedly awesome. So I can't recommend it enough. I'm not going to go much further than that, except to say that they really focus in on the relationships between the people, but not in a way that makes you disappointed you're not seeing zombies. I know that there's another show that came out that is about monsters, but there really aren't any monsters in it. And it kind of bothered me that I didn't get more monsters. Well, in this, I never was sitting around going like, oh, I wish some more zombies would attack. I'm so riveted by these characters and their survival in this post-apocalyptic wasteland that I'm just thrilled to see what they do next. So a great show. Do yourself a favor and watch The Last of Us. It's amazing. Okay, now we'll talk about Cool Name. So let me jump right in with everybody. Sharing this. There we go. So here's our book, and I'm going to start taking you through it. So a lot of this has been rewritten and changed. We've updated things. We've tried to make it set it up for a broader audience than the team that we started with. Now you'll notice this is called version 0.1. This is not alpha any longer. I'm going to be updating and changing that. But it's .1 because this is our first true beta version that we're putting out. Now, it has a lot of information in here, things like what it is and how it was started. The usual stuff that people might not know who aren't really part of the project up through now. It also talks about the core rules, which is what this is a playtest for and what that means. And then it keeps the information about what's a playtest, how to playtest. You guys have seen all of this before, right? So you've seen all of this information. Now I get into the terminology, and you'll notice there's some changes here because we've added some additional terminology. I do want to note that you probably noticed that the change log is missing. I'm going to start putting out change logs, but they're going to be independent of the document itself, because at this point, the change log was just getting too big and it was kind of just wasting a lot of space right at the start of the book, which I didn't think was a good plan. But at any rate, one of the things that we've changed is we've added some additional terminology. Now, I'm not going to go too far into this right now because these different points we're going to be talking about more later. But some of the things that we are trying to highlight is the concept of an encounter, an adventure. And I realize some of this stuff you're going to be like, yeah, so what? Every game has encounters. But here's the thing. We're trying to codify some of this. And the reason we're trying to codify some of these concepts and ideas isn't because you have to use them on all of your games, but the idea is that it's going to allow us to do a better job first of helping people to learn the rules before when they don't really know them yet. It's also going to help us to do a better job of allowing people to customize the game. Because if you've got some good guardrails, if you've got a good framework, it's much easier to create customizations than if you don't have anything to work with, right? So that's part of the reason for why we're codifying some of these things the way we are. And then finally, because we believe that this is going to be a very an important part of this game is going to be modding. which is, for lack of a better term, modding, kind of like what you see for a lot of video games. We think this is going to be really important, and we need to give these folks who want to do this the tools to do that. Not just to make products to sell, but let's say you just want to create some cool action encounters and you want to share them with the world. By having a good framework, it allows people to plug them into their game and know how to use them in their game, even if they don't use the terminology exactly as written, because, you know, once you start playing, it becomes much more organic. But by having this terminology and all of this system in place, it allows us to build on it and share information between us, share pieces, right? So yeah, we have got encounters, which, as you guys know, there's 4 different types of encounters that we're looking at. There are combat encounters, there are action encounters, social encounters, and exploration encounters. Now, we're going to talk about the first 3 of these today, but all 4 are very important, and all 4 have some bones for you to work with when you're building these in your games. One of my hopes is that on the website, the Cool Name RPG website, we'll be able to set it up so that people can post things and share their ideas and encounters. Now, we still have to look into that because it's a little bit tricky coming up with how that all works and how we make sure that everything's legal and we don't end up with spam and all of that. But I'd love to create a central space where people can share things. Another thing that I do want to show you, if I can get it up, is that we are also in the process of doing some major upgrades on the website. So in a minute here, I'll probably show that to you, but just gonna have to give me a second to get it up and running. All right, so let's continue on here. Next, we have challenges. So anything that you have to, an obstacle you have to overcome, we call a challenge in the game. Now, challenge might be an enemy you have to defeat. A challenge might be a lock you have to pick. A challenge might be any number of cool things like that that happen during your role-playing game. Those are challenges. Those are things that will come up in the game. Hold on for 1 second here. Trying to get our website to come up and it's failing, but now I think I got it. Yeah, so there's challenges, there's action checks. An action check is anytime that you want to try something that requires, say, a roll. You're not sure you're going to be able to pull it off. That's an action check. If you know you can do it, if you got plenty of time, there's no check involved. You just go ahead and do it. Scores, the numerical numbers that we assign to things. Action scores, which is all the positive things that are influencing you during an action check. Your action dice, which is what the action score relates to. And then your difficulty score, which is the number you have to roll equal to or higher than to succeed. Now, we also have effect, which is the amount that you bypassed your target number by. So if you needed to get a 6 and you rolled a 9, your effect's a 3. Pretty straightforward stuff, pretty normal for role-playing games. Effect types. Now, we're going to be looking at doing effect types in where you actually are going to have body, mind, and spirit. Now, you'll notice this is different from the physical, mental, and instinctive, or whatever we used, inherent. No one liked the third name. It didn't work. And in the end, I just threw my arms up and said, look, let's just go with what's obvious. We're going to go body, mind, and spirit. We'll explain it in a way that makes sense, and we're going to go with it. Challenge scores as well. This is a number that you whittle away at over time to win a challenge. Hit points are an example of a challenge score in other games. Okay. Armor, which reduces the effects on the challenge score. Threat level, which is sort of the experience or power of an enemy. This lets you take a typical enemy template and then make them a little more powerful without going through a whole lot of effort. And then there's modus operandi, the MOs, which are like classes, sort of. They're a package of skills and experience. Character and NPC. We use NPC throughout just because monster isn't always the best term. I don't think it always fits. So yeah, so that's where we start out, just with a simple set of terms, especially because a lot of the people doing this, you guys will have already played games before. This isn't your first rodeo, you're going to know. Now, before I get too much further, I do want to show this to you here. Let me pull this up. Here you go. The new and improved website. We've been rolling pieces out on this. You can see that it has all the information and place where you can pledge, shows where you can hop on Discord or YouTube or Facebook, all the different places. Put the nice Happy smiling faces of all the consulting designers down here as well. The other thing that we put up here, you'll notice, are these, where the most important stuff is at the top here. You can download the rules directly right there. Sorry, I don't mean to actually download them at the moment. There are a lot of playtest resources available for download, including character sheets. Now, the information that's there right now is the older information. When we go live with this on the February 13th, when we go live with it on the 13th, we'll update it with all the new information. This includes the tome of requirements, the player-facing combat module that we put out, and some pre-gen characters that we're going to be coming up with as well. We also have the online rules available. Now, this is currently the older version of the rules, and so this is going to change, but this is where all those rules are going to be available. So just as we promised, we're setting it up. You're going to have full online access to the entire game and all the rules, and so the site's really coming along. So I just want to take a minute to highlight that. Matt Eberly did a fantastic job on this, and it's really coming together. So now, let's go back to Cool Name and start talking about it. So one of the first things here is that the mechanics have not changed fundamentally since we last talked about this. Action checks are still at the core. It's one of the core mechanics, along with challenge scores. Players make action checks to see if they succeed in an action. They whittle away a challenge score, and when it hits 0, they've overcome the challenge. Now, there are challenge 0, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but those are the basics. And also, which still has the same basic rule setup. Game Master sets a difficulty score where they add up all the things that make it hard. The player determines their action score by adding up all the things that help them. And then they find the right dice, roll, and see if they succeed by overcoming the difficulty score. We've found this to be very fast. I know some people are still not sold on the table. I know some people will never be sold on the table, but I have to tell you that in actual play, it goes very, very fast. And in fact, you basically start to memorize it. It's on your character sheet. We put big sheets right on the table. It's quick. And the other piece about it that I found has continued to be true is that it's fun, right? It's really fun to get extra dice to roll. So take that for what it is. You'll have to try it out yourself. But yeah, I think that is still going to work really well, and we're still sticking with that at this time. One other aspect about this is that it is very different than what people are seeing elsewhere and in other games. It's a different vibe, a different feel. Another piece of this is that it actually mathematically is allowing us to do a lot of incredibly cool stuff in very versatile ways. And as we go through, we'll be talking a little bit more about that. Now, you'll notice this doc is chock full of examples still. I'm continuing to try to put examples in because there's nothing that's worse than reading a rule and thinking, how exactly is that supposed to work? This makes it a lot easier to figure out, what to expect from the rules, how to use the rules in actual play. So I'm going to be putting lots of those examples in. You'll have to let me know if they work for you, if you like them, if they're too many, and we can just, adapt as we go. Keeping open-ended roles, that's worked out really well. We've had some pretty epic moments in our game. Last week, we had a group go into the Zemayan jungle in the world of Ataltis, the Zemayan jungle, and a huge reptilian beast came surging out of the forest, and one of our characters threw a dagger and stuck it straight into the creature's eye because he open-ended the roll a couple of times and got an absolutely fabulous score, and just an epic moment where this character, who he wasn't sure he was even going to be able to help, came in and saved the day. And so that's the sort of thing that's a lot of fun to see happen and keep stories that we're going to keep around forever. We're going to come back. I'll tell you more about that character in just a little bit. Now, skipping the roll is still an important part of the game. If there's no pressure, if there's nothing going on, if we know the character can do it, just skip the roll. On top of that, another aspect of skipping the roll is saying that you can still do the comparisons. That still works. Compare the action score to the difficulty score. You're good to go. I do expect to see quite a few modules from folks that focus on that try to do away with the die roll completely, because I know some people like this idea of just keeping it very fluid, quick, eliminating the randomness and telling a story in that fashion. It can be a lot of fun. But that's not where we're headed right now for the core rules. We're keeping the dice rolls for now, but you can compare scores. All right. One of the things we've done is we've streamlined and updated the difficulty chart. You can see here, whoops, sorry, thought I was going to zoom in and instead I rolled away, but we've spread it out a little bit. Now, I will say the reason why we had the gaps we had the first time is that we based the difficulty chart initially on the statistical chance of hitting certain difficulties in 5th edition. Because we know that 5th edition has already been fairly well tested. We know what works and what doesn't. It gave us a good foundation. And so we matched some of the statistical probabilities in Cool Name RPG to those in 5th edition, and it helped us to come up with these numbers. Now, one thing we started to do is we started to clarify some things, find better ways of wording them. So, for example, when you're looking at the difficulty score, you ask what level of skill is needed for someone to succeed under normal conditions. And there we look at the skill level needed. Well, you need to be a novice to do it, right? We just made it a little clearer on how that works and how you think about this information as you start figuring this out. But if you need it, here's your chart, there's your numbers for your difficulties right there, and then you can modify it from there because we still have difficulty score modifiers. We're still pushing the +1 system. I still am not convinced that it's going to stay in the game. I love it. It's so simple and beautiful, but I'm not sure if it can work. But for now, we're going to keep it for now and see how it works in a more campaign-oriented, heavy-duty playtest scenario. Determining the action score. Primary attribute plus an MO score. That's the basis of determining your action score in this game. The better you are at your ability, the better your attribute score is, the better your chances. It's that simple and straightforward. But then, of course, you can add a number of other things, such as focuses and specializations, which we'll get to in a minute. Other scores like a spell or a sword or something that makes it easier for you to overcome the challenge that you're facing. And then, of course, basic modifiers as well. Now, effect is one thing that we talked a little bit about, but is now an official part of the game. We call that difference between what you rolled and the difficulty score your effect. And the effect can come into play in a lot of different ways. We're using it in only a few ways right now, but I do foresee opportunities for people to come up with really cool ways to build out new systems that we can add to this, or that you could replace systems with that utilize effect in different ways, like magic, the magnitude of power of a magical spell, or how many points you have to spend or not spend depending on the spell. There's just a lot of different ways that you could use effect, even like pushing reaction results up or down, right? To get different reactions from people. Lots of cool things we can do. And now we do have the 3 effect types. The reason for this is that we are going to be looking at this, and this is something new we're trying in this one. I'm going to see what everyone thinks, but we are looking at doing 3 vitality scores: body, mind, and spirit. The idea is that body is your physical health, mind is your mental health, and spirit is your emotional health, is a way to think about it. And any of those could be attacked, could be knocked down, could even cause you to become incapacitated. This allows us to do things like having a game where fear is a real heavy hitter in the game, right? Where fear comes into play and you've got characters that are losing it, Cthulhian type of adventures. We also have the mental game where you can go into a mind-to-mind battle, whether or not it's psionics or not. It does give us this tool. And on top of that, we can tie this to magic. And that's something we're going to be talking about. Probably not this week. I don't think we're going to get to it, but next week, we'll probably talk a little bit more about magic and how that can tie in. So again, it's there for a reason, not just to add these extra scores, but because they tie into options in the game that are going to allow us to do a lot more with it and allow you guys to come up with a lot of cool stuff. So then from there, we go on to talk about challenge scores. Now, a key thing about challenge scores in this game, it's going to come into play a lot more in combat. And I think this is going to be probably one of the more controversial things that we're going to be looking at. But despite my own misgivings, and we'll get into that in a minute, it's working really well. Now, the whole idea with a challenge score is that I gave an example a while back on one of the shows where I talked about the Avengers climbing a cliff. Seems like a strange thing to talk about, but bear with me. So in a role-playing game, if the Avengers approach a cliff and wish to climb it, every Avenger rolls a climbing roll. Not really a great representation of how our favorite books and movies work. In an actual action film of the Avengers. Hulk is going to make a leap to try to just leap to the top. The Thing is, well, he's not one of the Avengers, but we'll go with him. The Thing's crunching his hands in to make handholds all the way to the top, right? So he's making strength checks. Scarlet Witch is using magic. Iron Man just going to fly. Captain America is probably the only guy who's making an actual climbing check to get up to this cliff. Hawkeye pulls out an arrow with a rope on it, shoots it up there. So it's actually his whole thing is just he's making an attack roll with his bow. I mean, we are bound by some of these rules in a way that undermines the storytelling. And with challenge scores, allowing you to use whatever it is that you have at hand to do a cool thing and build a cool story and overcome the obstacle, it opens up storytelling possibilities. And I was nervous about this, but when I've seen it in play, it actually works great and folks are having a blast. And we'll talk a little bit more about this when I share a little of the experience we had just this last week with our adventure. Challenge score 0. Not everything has a challenge score, right? Some things, like, for example, the example I give is you're catching a ball. You either catch it or you don't. You don't get like 2 chances where you do a little better each time and eventually catch the ball. Either you make it or you don't. There's still lots of actions that are just challenge score 0, right? You roll, you get it or you don't. And so we take that into account in the system. Finally, there are armor scores. Armor has scores that protect against certain effect types, right? Body, mind, or spirit. Now, mostly body is what we're concerned about in this case, because we're really talking about your standard RPG combat system, right? So body, mind, or spirit, armor protects, it reduces the effect of a successful action check. And finally, there's immunity. Certain things, some challenges are immune to certain effect types, right? But this comes into the idea that at some point, there's common sense that has to come into play, saying that, look, you are not going to use your bardic skills to move that rock. It's not going to happen. I shouldn't say that because everyone's going to take this as a challenge now, but under normal circumstances, that's not a logical way to move the rock using your bardic perform skill. Just doesn't. Now, maybe if you use your perform skill to convince all the locals at the nearby town to come move the rock for you and you'll do a free performance or something, but even that is a bit of a stretch. So there is the idea of immunities, that you can't just do anything with anything. But we do want to leave it as open as possible so people can come up with cool ideas. Now, one thing I do want to just mention for a moment is that for a while there was, in the gaming community, at least from my observation, there was a movement to distrust game masters. If you didn't give them the rules, if you didn't hem them in, if you didn't keep them going, they were going to wreck the game, then people wouldn't like it, right? They wouldn't run a good enough game. Now, lack of game masters is a real problem. We do have a challenge sometimes where someone doesn't run something well and then no one likes it. But most of the time, I believe that we can put a lot of trust in the GMs and their ability to create a fun game for their friends. To that end, I don't think we have to block people on certain types of actions. We don't need to call out that the bard, when we have a rock moving challenge, I don't have to put in there, performance won't work. The GM can figure that out. They can make the call. Or if somehow someone comes up with something really cool, let's not block them from doing it. Let's let the GM allow it, right? So that's what I'm talking about when I say that, we trust the GMs. They know how to do this. They can make good judgment calls and they can pick things that are going to be fun for the game without it getting silly, right? And Cool Name puts that confidence and faith in the GMs. That's even for things like when you talk about people min-maxing, and we'll talk a little bit about MOs later. But the reality is that I believe players and GMs can form the game that they want to play, and we don't need to hem them in to make sure they do it right. So anyway, that's my little speech. Hop off my soapbox now and get back to the rules here. So next up, we have character attributes. These have not changed, other than the fact that the groupings are body, mind, and spirit. Coordination, strength, toughness, creativity, intellect, willpower, all the same there. Awareness, empathy, presence, the same there as well. We also did a better job of highlighting what typical human ability scores are. So, for example, a 3 is average, an average person. A 4 is superior. 2, 1, and 0 are, the weak, feeble, and insignificant. Now, you're probably wondering, like, 0? Seriously? Yeah, we're keeping 0 in there because this actually works pretty well for small creatures. Let's say a squirrel. What's its strength? Who cares, right? Unless we're playing a game where you're shrunk down to squirrel size, squirrel strength doesn't matter. It's not important to the game. It's not going to change the outcome of the events that are happening in the game. So let's just give it a 0 and move on. I think that this is super important because it allows us to have these weak creatures that and yet still have a role in the game without having the weird sort of situations where they do things that don't make any sense. Like you have a fairy that manages to lift up a cart or something, which, yeah, magic and all that. But let's be realistic here. We don't necessarily need the fairy to have a high strength. Even a 1 is probably too high for a creature that's a foot tall and, as thin as my fingers. So 0 for insignificant is important. So it doesn't mean no strength. It just means it doesn't matter in game terms. Now, secondary attributes. Let's talk a little bit about that. Physical defenses. Now, physical defenses, we've kept the 3 defenses of dodge, parry, and block. But actually, let me show you guys something else here. I didn't even think to bring this up, but I really want to show it to you so I can sort of explain this in the form of a character sheet. Let's see here. Sorry about this, folks. I just want to make sure to show this to you because it is pretty great. All right. There you go. How about that? Look at that. A character sheet for you to look at. So what have we got here? We've got our dodge, parry, and block. You'll notice that dodge is based on coordination, which I'm going to be calling COR for short instead of COO because everyone who sees Ku laughs. We've also got our parry, which is based on strength, and block, which is based on toughness. So why did we break these up this way? There's plenty of arguments to say things like, well, that's not exactly how it works, and parry is as much coordination and all of this and that. But the reality is that we did run into a problem where coordination became sort of like the ultimate stat, right? Everyone was dropping their best number into coordination because it affected their dodge, it affected their parry, their block, their to hit. Everything was dependent on coordination, initiative, and it didn't work, right? If you get into that scenario, you've got a game that's really not going to encourage people to create unique characters. Everyone's just going to game it to the one. Not everyone. There's people like me who make insane characters and they're weird, but most people will end up pushing that, right? Otherwise, they'll be sitting out of things. So what we did is we went ahead and updated it so that each one of these is based off a different ability, and it sort of helps a character to decide, like, what's my go-to going to be? What is a good option for me in terms of defense? Another thing that we did, changed initiative. Initiative now is coordination plus intellect plus awareness. All 3 parts of your character come into play: body, mind, and spirit in your initiative. So an incredibly intelligent character will still get a good advantage on initiative because they'll see what's coming, they figure it out. Now, granted, they'll be hampered if they have a low coordination compared to a character that has decent coordination and intellect. But what it does is it says you don't have to be physical to be part of the combat and part of the game. That's an important part of this. You'll remember we talked about this back when we came up with our requirements, that we wanted people of all different character types to be able to participate in every encounter. So they're not sitting back going like, well, I'm the wizard, so I guess I'll just, and I'm out of spell points, so I'll just sit here and watch the fight, which is terrible, right? It's not fun at all. And so we wanted to find a way to resolve that problem. All right. Now, we still have wounds and wound thresholds, but I'll get to that in a little bit. It's different. We cleaned it up, made it a lot easier. So going on from there, we got vitality, which, as you guys probably saw here, body vitality is these 3 attributes, mind, these 3 attributes, and spirit are these 3 attributes, right? The 3 spirit attributes are your vitality. So this has helped us to come up with a way of identifying what the vitality score should be. The number seems to be working in terms of being not too little, so you're getting knocked out all the time, but not being so much that you are constantly not afraid of anything. So you got your 3 vitality scores. And then finally, down here, we have incapacitated. We talk about that. Now, because there's 3 vitality scores, there's different ways to become incapacitated. And this is actually pretty fun. Because body is obvious. You're seeing stars, you're punch drunk, you're got cuts and bruises, you've got the wind knocked out of you, right? But mind vitality, what is that? Well, that's where you're just become so completely confused that you tend to disassociate the fact that at this point nothing is making sense to you, and you just can't make any more decisions. You can't even come up with decisions to make. It's a very cool sort of concept that you don't see, that, if we end up adding in some modules for more detailed wounds and things, you could have head wounds and things that go along with this, and sort of the challenges that come along with that. It doesn't sound fun. We're going to add head wounds. It's going to be great. But for those of you who like that sort of thing, you'll see what I'm saying. But the possibilities are pretty great there. Also, psionics. Would be very good for building out a psionics system at some point. Now, spirit vitality. Spirit vitality is your emotional state. You might be emotionally broken, overcome with terror. Like I've said here, you might be suffering from a soul-searing existential crisis. When you hit zero, you're just like, you can't go on. You just can't go on. You don't have the emotional wherewithal to pull yourself together. And this is great for horror games like Cthulhu type storylines, right? So I really like that we've been able to get this in here. I like that it's just as simple as all the rest. And one thing you'll be noticing is that we're repeating rule patterns throughout, so that it's not like a completely different system every attribute you look at or every type of action. Worked very hard to keep the repeating patterns so that you know how the system works in pretty short order. Wound threshold. Finally, we've got our wound threshold. This is, again, if you take damage, basically have an effect that's higher than your wound threshold, you take a wound. We'll get to what that means shortly. And then finally, initiative, which we've talked about. So let's go on to MOs. So we're keeping MOs. Right now, the MOs are very popular. In fact, they're one of the single most popular things that we've had come out of this game is the MO system so far. Not just because MOs are a great system or something, but people love making their own. This has been fascinating to me to watch, because in the feedback we've received and in my playtests that I've seen, people love making their own MOs. This is like what they get into, right? They look at all the MOs we've got. They go, can I make something different? Because it's not there what I want to play. I'm going to bring up one of the MOs that came up in our own games as we were playing. Daredevil. So what's a daredevil? Well, a friend of mine came up with his backstory. He wanted to be a knife thrower who had to escape the circus. He left the circus, something bad happened, and he had to make a run for it. And so that's his background. He was a circus knife thrower. And he's like, I just don't know what skill set I would use. Do I take like warrior, an athlete, or what's appropriate? I said, well, why don't you just make something up? So he said, well, how about I'm a daredevil? That's what I was trained to be. I'm like, great. So what does a daredevil look like? And he started coming up with his focuses. What are his focuses? The areas that a daredevil would train in. What is a general description of what his skill set would be? So we've got an acrobatics focus. It has to do with his tightrope walking and tumbling and all of that sort of stuff. You've got his coordination, which I forget what he called it, but the other focus that includes things like knife throwing and juggling, things like that, right? And so he came up with this, and right there while making characters, we put this together, and I stepped back and went, this is an amazing MO. This is an MO that could be in the game. It's really fun. And during our game, it has proven to be very, very cool. The next player said, well, I want to be like Indiana Jones. So kind of a warrior, but kind of a scholar. He goes, but what about this? And he showed me, and I'm like, man, that looks great. So we're going to talk a little bit more about building MOs later, but MOs right now, I don't see them going away because they've been really, really popular. Now, I've also put in here like what your MO score means to give you an idea of, as you're going through. Now, I'm not sold on these numbers because we're not really looking to have people bump their MOs up to like a 7 or a 10 in a high level game necessarily. In fact, we'll talk a little bit about advancement, but this is just here for the time being to let us have a general idea. We still have the concept of familiarity, where if you're taking an action check that is indirectly related to your MO, you can still do it, but you have +1 to your difficulty. In addition, you can't use a focus or a specialization on it because it's not something that you even studied, much less focused on. So a great example of that is, we put an example in here about Wargar trying to how to greet a noble. And we're like, you don't know how to greet a noble. You're a soldier of fortune. You don't hang out with nobles. He said, but I do. Most of my commanders in the military were nobles. I was like, he's not wrong about that. So I would say maybe you picked some stuff up, but you don't totally understand it. So it's a familiarity. We're going to make it a little more difficult for you than it would be for someone who actually did learn how to talk to nobles. So that's there, working really well. Focuses and specialization are the next levels down. Now, keep in mind that I still, I've been focusing on this, but I still have my skill wheel system that you can put in module that is for folks who really like a more traditional skill system. Works great, fits right in, fits with the rules, because all you're doing is just adding up these numbers, just like in the MO system, but it's a little bit more structured in terms of prerequisites and how it works. So the MOs, not much has changed there. I'm not going to go too much further into those for the time being. We do have some new ones that we're adding. They're not in this document. The Mountebank I'm putting in from Ataltus, which is like a con artist, just because it's one of my favorite characters to play. But yeah, we've got all of that going on. Now, combat encounters. Done a lot of work on this based on feedback and based on actual play. So we still have rounds and turns. This is all normal. You have a round and everyone gets a turn during the round. I put in here a little note about how long a round is, because this question always comes up in games. Now, I emphasize the fact that this game does an impression and not a simulation of combat and action. In other words, when you look at it, you're like going, yeah, that looks right. But in reality, it's not a perfect simulation of how the combat would go. It's not our goal. If you remember, our goal is Indiana Jones, James Bond, Lara Croft, that sort of a thing, right? That's what we're aiming for, and that's not a simulation. That's an impression of reality. However, 6 seconds, threw it out there in case you need it. It helps people in case they know what's going on. You still have initiative rolls based on your initiative score. You can change your initiative by taking an action. Then we get into the actions, and this is where I start to get into some new stuff. I've been getting into new stuff throughout, but more new stuff here. I've broken down combat into 4 basic types of action. There are attack actions, which are designed to reduce the challenge rating of an opponent or of a challenge. You have assist actions, which are designed to increase the action score of a friend. You have obstruct actions, which are designed to increase the difficulty score of the enemy. And you have interact actions, which is everything else that you want to do on the battlefield. So that requires an action check. So, for example, attack action check. That is a straight up combat roll. I hit you with my sword. We all know what that is. The effect of that ends up being the damage that's done that reduces the challenge rating of the foe. Assist actions. So in this case, a great example is, like I put here, Altus makes an action check to cause a distraction that'll make it easier for Wargar to hit the goblin. So adds points. The effect of Altus's roll gets added to the action score of Wargar when he attacks. Very straightforward. Attaches right together very nicely. Fits together like Legos, which I love. Obstruct actions. Again, same idea. Spider decides he wants to throw sand in the eyes of the goblin. So the GM has him make a throwing roll with the defense score of the goblin. If he succeeds, the amount that he succeeds by is going to reduce or increase the difficulty score for the goblin's actions. So now the goblin's trying to hit and he can't see what he's doing. So his difficulty scores are higher. And then finally, we have interact actions, which are things like swinging from a rope, climbing up onto a table, any number of, picking a lock, whatever else you're trying to do. Now, movement, range, and position, we're not really getting in too far into this right now. I will say that I've talked a little bit about position and what sort of action, major or minor, you want to use for that. Also a little bit about range. When we get to the weapons, you'll see. So now I go in and actually list some major actions that you can do. Now, keep in mind, in your game, you will probably do exactly the major actions for the first 2 games at most. And then you'll just start doing things that fall into these categories. These are pretty straightforward categories, but I wanted to give people the framework to work with to make it easier to learn, easier to build, and easier to share. So Looking at these here, first up, we got an aim action that I've added in. This is an assist action. Remember, an assist increases an action score to yourself. You're assisting yourself. Your success, your effect of your aim gets added to your action score when you attack. Very simple and straightforward, and it fits right within the same rule set as all the rest. What's cool about this is it allows you to use intelligence or awareness on this roll. So, in other words, aiming is intelligence or awareness, taking the shot is going to be coordination. So, this is fun for characters that want to do ranged combat, but maybe are something like a wizard with a sling or something like that. They can take an extra turn to aim and line that shot up before they attack. A very nice thing to put in, and it fits into that assist category. Then you have your aim and then assist, which we talked about. This is assisting another character, increasing their action score. Now, throughout these, I've noted that you don't just say, I'm going to assist Bob, right? You have to say something like, look at the situation, come up with how you would actually do it. This is my encouragement. Now, if you don't want to do this, you just want to run it with the numbers, totally fine, it works. But I encourage folks in the rules to say, look, explain the heroic way that you are assisting. What is it that you're doing, right? That's going to help the other player. Next up, now keep in mind too, this isn't just on attacks. It can be on anything, whatever you're helping them with. And this works outside of combat as well, but we're focusing on combat in this chapter. Then you've got your basic attack, melee or ranged, uses the same rules either way. The primary attribute is dependent on the weapon, which we'll get to a little bit later, but usually there's strength or coordination for a standard melee or ranged attack roll. Now we're going to get into something that's kind of cool. Let's get into the special attack option. This is an attack in that it is designed to reduce the challenge rating of an enemy. In other words, it's how you beat the enemy. So how do you go about beating the enemy? Well, a great example. I said that scaly beast. We'll call it a allosaur just for for the sake of discussion. Comes out of the jungle. One of the characters, he really wasn't armed with a weapon for dinosaur fighting. So one of the first things he did was an assist or an obstruction, which I'll get to in a minute. But then after that, he decided he was going to go up and try to drive it into the woods with a torch, right? Afraid of fire. Monsters don't like fire. So he came at it with a torch and made a special attack. So he actually went up. It was a presence-based roll because he's trying to get him to look at it and be afraid, almost an intimidation. It's heightened by the fact that he has this torch in his hand and he goes forward and he's poking the thing with the torch as he's sitting there. Now, he didn't do a ton of effect. He did like 3 or 4 points, and this is a creature with a very high effect score. But he did impact the combat without having to have some awesome dinosaur killing weapon. He was able to impact the combat. He was able to drive this thing back and be part of the game. And it was super cool. And it made a great story because that's what happens in all the stories we watch, right? What dinosaur scene doesn't come up, or a monster scene where somebody doesn't come at it with a torch and like wave it at it and try to drive it back into the woods? This system supports that, and it's very cool. So you've got this special attack option that you've got here as well. Now we talk a little bit about difficulty scores. How do you set the difficulty score? A lot of that has to do with the different defenses, but mind, body, or spirit just depends on what you're trying to do to the thing, right? Drive it off, it's probably going to go against its spirit defense. All right. And so now we've got our coup de grace. It is what it is, right? It's to defeat, to put the killing blow on an enemy that is either incapacitated or unconscious. Now, one of the points of this is that because you can attack monsters and reduce their challenge rating in ways other than physical combat, there are outcomes of winning where the monster hits a 0 challenge rating. There are outcomes that just aren't going to fit into the I get knocked out cold and fall on the ground, right? They don't all fit that. Well, that's where this comes in is, let's say you've scared the monster off into a corner. It's at 0 challenge rating and you decide to finish it off, right? That's an action you can take. It's immediate and it lets you defeat the creature. Again, it's all part of this idea that there are other ways to win. Now, defend. This is an obstruct action that you can use to keep other people safe. What you're doing is you're actually raising their defense score, right, with yours. So you go in there. We actually had a great example where the knife thrower was fighting the dinosaur, and he's like sitting there in his like circus tights and stuff, going like, I'm going to get munched. So the guy with the shield ran up in front of him and said, I'm going to make a defend roll to keep him safe so that he can throw knives at it. Like, that's awesome. So he did defend rolls, and his effect added to the defense of the knife thrower who was running up to throw knives. It made it easier because the knife thrower was being targeted, made it easier for the knife thrower to survive because his buddy was able to jump in and help. And this is fun because it's not just hitting the creature again and again. It was people finding cool ways to work together and create a story that really was much more vibrant and interesting than just a series of attacks. Theo says, thank you for your work and passion on this game, Mark. You're welcome, Theo, and thank all of you for supporting us on this. This has been so much fun doing this together with everyone. I just couldn't be happier with how things are all coming along. Okay, so defend, I talked about, is a kind of obstruct action, right? Next up is interact. Interact is just everything else. I'm not going to go into that. Obstruct, in a more general term, is anything that increases difficulty scores for the enemy. No matter what they're trying to do. If they're trying to climb the cliff, maybe you make an obstruct roll to pour oil down over the cliff face. We don't have to worry about what does oil do to cliffs. We know that your character rolled and got an effect of 3. So that means that their difficulty scores are all raised by 3. Good luck, guys. Try to make it up the cliff now. It also then, the thing about this that's kind of nice is that if you roll really high, it means that you really pulled it off awesome. And you might have to force your enemy to completely change their strategy because what they were doing isn't going to work. Of course, now we've got minor actions. We've turned delay and ready into minor actions. They work just like they did previously, where ready is you have to specify what you're going to do when the specific thing happens. Delay gives you a little more freedom, but you have to go after everyone else on the turn. So basic stuff like most games that you've played. Next, we talk about NPC challenge ratings. So I put a little list in here. What is a challenge rating? It encompasses not only their physical health, but their morale, their mental stability, their endurance, their strategy, their determination, their spirit, their experience, all sorts of things. Because really, at the end of the day, beating an enemy in a really cool action adventure story like the ones we wanted to sort of model this around, beating that enemy isn't about whether or not he has any blood left in him. It's about whether or not the enemy has been defeated. And defeat takes on a ton of different appearances and ideas, and all of this is covered here. And so it's a very fun approach to it. It is going to take a little bit of getting used to for folks who haven't done this before. It took me getting used to, because what I just told some folks on Discord is I pointed out that what you might not know about me, or you might not if you know me already, but what you probably don't know about me is that I tend to play very crunchy games. I play GURPS and Hero and even the Hackmaster version of AD&D First Edition, which no one will play with me, but I still love. Now, does that mean that's what I've been trying to build? Absolutely not. We've been guided in a completely different direction by our consulting designers and by all of you. And what we have is a game that I would not have normally gravitated toward. And yet, when we've played it, I've been surprised by how much I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed a lot of different games, but this one, and when I say surprised, I mean like we've really enjoyed it. Like, I can't wait to keep playing this game. So yeah, it's a very different approach, and it's been fantastic. It's got an experience and a vibe going on that's not like other games I've played. But that's because we do things like this challenge rating, which will take a little getting used to, but my whole preaching there was to say, give it a chance. You'll be surprised at how cool this is. Even if it looks like something you wouldn't normally do, it actually works really well. All right, so let's take a look here. NPC melee and ranged attacks. Nothing special to say here. The action scores are built into the monster descriptions. Their defenses are built in. It's all right there. Not too much has changed from last time. Now, NPCs and other major actions. NPCs can do anything. We're not limited to them being able to do one or two things. It's just like any other role-playing game. The GM has complete freedom. We are going to give creatures a body, mind, and spirit score. And so that'll let you have a basic thing to go from. I don't think they need all 9 stats unless they're like a main character. So we're going to try this body, mind, spirit, see how it works. It might be great, but I don't know. It's a little tricky, right? Because an elephant's going to have a really high body, but it doesn't make them coordinated. So not really sure, but we'll see. Brawling. We added in rules for brawling. Brawling is what we call anything that's like body to body combat. Wrestling, shoving, tripping, knocking people down, anything other than hitting and kicking. That's all, normal combat. But brawling has things, and one of the things that we introduced with brawling, and this is something new, is that we have all of these actions that have a prerequisite. And most of them have a prerequisite of grab. Before you can use a lot of these, you have to use an action to grab your target. And then on your next turn, you can do something. Like, for example, if you grab your target on your next turn, you can drag them, which means grab them and pull them someplace else. Alternatively, if you grab someone, they can move someplace else and drag you. So they can make a drag action because you've got them grabbed and they're going to just pull you along with them. These are things that we can do with this. Escape is the obvious thing. You can get out of the grab. We also have things like harm, and that includes everything from twisting someone's arm behind their head to choking them out, that sort of a thing. That's what harm is. It reduces their challenge rating, right? Restrain. This is a level above grab. This is if you wanted to pin someone, but it's basically they can't take actions. If you grab someone, they can still take actions. But if you restrain them, they cannot. They have to break free of the restraint before they can take actions. And so that is one of the tricks, is that grabbing someone is tricky, but I think it should be. But what's kind of cool is that if I grab you, you can grab me back. And we can both have a hold on one another and trying to do these other moves. And so some of these other moves are things like shove, where I can just push you away. There's takedown, where I can flip you over and smash you onto the ground, but maintain my grab, right? There's throw, where I actually move you 5 feet and release my grab. And so I think this stuff's going to be pretty fun. I know I've always been frustrated by a lot of game rules on this for wrestling and things, but I think this works pretty well. And having watched an infinite number of wrestling matches with my brother when he was in high school. Shout out to him for having been an awesome wrestler. I learned a lot about watching how people interact when they're trying to wrestle. And I think that we've captured some of this here, which will be really fun. It also opens the door for all sorts of martial arts. So get thinking your creative ideas. The other thing in here that I like is the take maneuver, where you can grab something that someone else is holding and try to rip it out of their hand. So your grab is on the item as opposed to them. The tough thing is that when you make the take roll to rip it out of their hand, the effect damages the item. So I love this because it's sort of like, well, what happens if you try to grab the glass sphere out of or glass jar out of the guy's hand? Well, unfortunately, you're going to do damage to it. So hopefully don't grab it too hard. So just kind of fun stuff that you can have in there during your game. All right, let's talk a little bit about vitality, wounds, and healing. Wow, we are almost at the 1 hour mark. Folks, I'm afraid I'm going to have to wrap things up, and we'll have to do a special event next time. I'm just going to give you a quick, before we wrap things up here, you can see we have done quite a bit with weapons. We have a whole series of weapons properties, and look at this. Welcome to equipment list, folks. We've got all sorts of weapons. We've got armor and shields of a whole variety. There is a lot of stuff here. You guys are in for a full-blown game the next time you play. So I'm very excited about that. We also have rules for action encounters, which are encounters like a room that is flooding. And one of the cool things here that I want to just mention is escalating challenge ratings. Now, hat tip to DBJ, who talked to me about this, and he and I discussed this. Escalating challenge ratings is a challenge rating that starts at one point, but then goes up every round. And so while you're trying to move it down, it's trying to move back up. And when it hits certain points, it triggers events. So, for example, the challenge rating might start at 5, but when it hits 10, something happens that adds to the scene and adds to the encounter. This is very cool. And here's what's fun about this. It's the same rules. Advance reduces your, and again, I don't expect people to use these terms after they learn the game, but advance reduces the challenge rating. Assist increases someone else's action score. Clear removes a difficulty modifier, right? So there are modifiers, clearing a modifier. Delay gives you more time. It removes the escalation effect. And then simplify is to reduce the difficulty score. So you can see here, again, this system is exactly the same. You're making the same sorts of rolls. You're asking the same questions every time. and you're getting a fantastic experience as a result without having to come up with all different rules. And then, of course, we come to social encounters. Folks, this is something I can't wait to see what you guys do with this. So social encounters to begin with are already an interesting thing. For example, social encounters have rounds and turns, but how long are they? Are they a minute? Are they an hour? It depends on the situation. You might have a royal ball and your rounds and turns are an hour each. Your rounds are an hour each. That involves going around and talking to a whole bunch of people and trying to slowly get that challenge rating down to discover the information that you're looking for. How are you going to do it? Who are you going to go talk to? How are you going to make this happen? And when you hit the challenge rating, when you reduce it to 0, it means you've succeeded. You've got the information you need. But there's going to be limits, timers. Maybe the party only lasts for 5 hours. That's 5 chances and then you're done. So you need to get on it and make it work. You might need to work together to get the person who has the best chance to get an even better chance to succeed, right? So that's how all of that works. And then we get into something called social combat. Now, this is something that is very different. I don't know quite, now, honestly, I don't know what folks are going to think about this, but it's a specialized form of combat where, in our example, the Duke, you and the evil Blackheart both want the Duke to back them on your quest for the throne. And you're both trying to convince the Duke. You enter into social combat, where by making mind and spirit rolls, you will reduce the challenge rating or the vitality of your opponent. And when they hit 0, you've convinced them and achieved your goal. Maybe you've convinced them to join you or to fight against Blackheart or whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, right? And so using the exact same rule set and the same process and the same business of creating action scores, you suddenly have this duel of wits, duel of emotional blackmail, if you will, to create this scene where you're fighting against another. And when you get them down, you have won. You've made it. You've done the job. Yeah, there is a lot of stuff in this, guys. It's a lot. And I'm very excited. And we have even more that I'm just not going to have time to show you tonight. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to put off our MO discussion until next time because I've completely run out of time. I had no idea I've talked for this long. So keep an eye open, hop on Discord, talk to us about it, and watch your emails on Tuesday because that's when I'll be sending out the links for all of our backers to download this new version of the game. I think you're going to like it. Thank you all for watching tonight, and I hope you all have a good game. Thanks again, everyone.